The following morning arrived with the muted sounds of birds cautiously emerging after the tempest had passed. Sunlight filtered into their home, warming their damp spirits. Despite their trepidations, Anna and Jake spent the morning preparing for the meeting, gathering thoughtful notes outlining their grievances but also expressing their desires for resolution. As the clock ticked closer to the agreed time, a wave of apprehension knocked at Anna's heart. What if they don't show? She fretted, seconds before the doorbell rang, a startling interruption that made them both jump. Jake exchanged a glance with Anna before he moved to answer the door. There stood Mike and Susan, drenched from the earlier rain but steadfast, determination etched into their features. "Thanks for meeting with us," Mike said curtly, arms crossed, while Susan glared at them, her stance defensive. "Let's make this quick," Susan added, and Anna steeled herself against the tension that was palpable, feeling a wave of anger clashing with the hope that had sparked in her heart moments before. "Agreed," Jake replied, trying to keep his voice calm. "But let's take a moment to focus on resolving things instead of escalating it further." They retreated to the dining room table, Anna's stomach knotting as the atmosphere grew taut with brewing frustrations. As they settled in, Anna knew that they were standing on a precipice. This meeting could either lead them toward harmony or push them deeper into the storm. "Let's talk about the fence. What did you intend to accomplish?" Anna began, her voice steady as she glanced at Susan, who remained rigid in her chair. "We're tired of feeling like the outcasts here," Susan responded, her eyes flickering with subdued anguish. "You have everything, a house, a yard, and now you want to keep us out." Emily nodded. "Your kids have been playing in our space for months. Let's find a way to share this neighborhood, not fight over it." As they exchanged harsh words and impassioned pleas, something unexpected began to unfold. Beneath the layers of bitterness, they slowly began to uncover common ground. Their families, their dreams of raising children in a safe, encompassing community, their desires for a shared future. When Anna offered Susan a tentative smile, she felt warmth radiate through the room like the morning sun peeking in through the blinds. Perhaps neither side knew how to communicate their needs without stepping on each other's toes. But perhaps here, in the midst of their differences and irritations, they all craved something that could bind them in understanding. With every tangential moment, as they shared their stories of misunderstandings, the storm inside them started to subside, revealing cracks where light could seep in. Hours passed, and tentative resolutions began to form. They agreed to share the garden space, reallocate some borders, and even considered regular neighborhood gatherings, a festival of growing friendship forged through rain. As they sat there, a weight began to lift. Frustrations didn't evaporate instantly, but the understanding laid a foundation on which healing could be built. It wasn't the end, it was a step. With all hearts exposed, Anna realized they were now walking the same path, a journey towards No's peace amongst the recurring storms of life. As she looked around at the faces gathered at their table, she saw a reflection of her own resilience, a present moment alive and rich with possibilities, beckoning them forward into a future where they could finally breathe freely together. Today they forged an agreement not just to tolerate one another but to coexist. And in that moment, beneath the embrace of sunlight breaking through the remaining clouds, they found hope. Together, they had conquered the storm. The warm autumn sun was setting as Oscar Brown's truck pulled into his driveway after a much-needed week-long fishing trip in Montana. For Oscar, a retired Marine Corps veteran, these solitary retreats had become essential for his mental well-being, helping him cope with the PTSD that had shadowed him since his third tour in Afghanistan. However, that peaceful feeling evaporated the moment he rounded the corner of his beloved single-story ranch house. The sight before him made his heart stop. His meticulously maintained garden, a therapeutic project recommended by his VA counselor, lay in ruins. The raised beds he had built by hand were crushed, and vegetables and herbs were strewn across the mud like casualties of war. The mature oak trees, which had provided shade for his grandfather's bench, were reduced to fresh stumps, their severed limbs piled under unceremoniously near his property line. But what truly made his blood run cold was the sight of his custom-built deck, a space where he had spent countless hours finding solace in nature, being systematically dismantled by a crew of construction workers. Oscar barely registered putting his truck in park before he was out the door, his combat boots hitting the gravel with purpose. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, his voice carrying the natural authority of someone used to commanding troops. The workers paused, looking uncertain, but before any could respond, a sharp voice cut through the evening air. "Mr. Brown, I presume." A woman in her mid-40s, dressed in an impeccable business suit despite the dusty surroundings, strode toward him with the confidence of someone who was used to getting her way. "I'm Carol Preston, president of the Oakwood Heights Homeowners Association. We've been trying to reach you regarding numerous violations of our community standards." Oscar's mind raced, trying to make sense of her words. He had owned this property for 5 years, inherited it from his grandfather, who had built the house with his own hands in the 1960s, long before any fancy developments had sprung up in the area. There must be some mistake. "I'm not part of any homeowners association." Carol's perfectly maintained smile didn't waver as she pulled out a tablet, her manicured fingers scrolling through documents with practiced efficiency. "According to our records, your property has recently been incorporated into the boundaries of Oakwood Heights. We've sent multiple notices regarding required property upgrades and landscaping standards. Your rustic additions," she gestured dismissively at the wreckage of his garden, "are in clear violation of Section 7.3 of our community guidelines." The familiar sensation of combat alertness crept up Oscar's spine, his senses heightening as they did in potentially hostile situations. He forced himself to take a deep breath, remembering the grounding techniques his therapist had taught him. "Show me the documentation that proves my property is part of your homeowners association," he said, keeping his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. Carol's smile faltered slightly. "Our legal team has determined that your property falls within our jurisdiction. Now, if you'll excuse me, these workers need to finish bringing the property up to code before sundown." She turned to walk away, clearly considering the matter settled. Oscar's mind raced. He couldn't let this go. Pulling his phone from his pocket, he quickly dialed 911. "This is Oscar Brown at 1247 Old Mill Road. I need police assistance immediately. There are people trespassing on my property and destroying my home without authorization." He noticed Carol stumble slightly at his words, but she quickly recovered, pulling out her own phone. Within minutes, 2 police cruisers arrived, their lights casting alternating red and blue shadows across the increasingly chaotic scene. Officer Hamilton, a local cop who had responded to a few minor incidents in the area before, approached with a professionally neutral expression. "What's the situation here?" Oscar explained his side first, producing his property deed, tax records, and historical documentation from his truck's glove compartment. He'd learned long ago to keep important papers easily accessible. Carol interrupted frequently, insisting that the Homeowners Association had the authority to enforce community standards on adjacent properties, citing various legal precedents that sounded impressive but made Oscar's gut instinct for trouble tingle. Officer Hamilton listened to both sides, then made a call to the station. After a few minutes of quiet conversation, he turned to Carol. "I'm not seeing any legal documentation that incorporates Mr. Brown's property into your homeowners association. Without a court order or the owner's consent, you have no authority to modify or destroy private property." Carol's professional demeanor cracked slightly, a flash of anger crossing her features. "This is ridiculous. We have procedures in place. The board voted. We sent notices." She turned to the construction crew, who had been watching the exchange with growing unease. "Continue with the work. Our lawyers will sort this out." Officer Hamilton stepped forward, his hand resting casually on his belt. "I'm ordering all work to stop immediately. If your crew continues, they'll be arrested for criminal damage to property. The same goes for any homeowners association officers present." The workers didn't need to be told twice. They began packing up their tools, some casting apologetic glances at Oscar. He barely noticed, too focused on documenting the damage with his phone's camera. The devastation was even worse up close. Years of careful cultivation destroyed in a matter of hours. Carol's voice took on a threatening tone. "This isn't over, Mr. Brown. The Homeowners Association has significant legal resources at our disposal. We'll see how long you can afford to fight this." She turned on her heel, her designer shoes somehow managing to navigate the muddy ground with practiced ease. As the sun set completely, casting long shadows across the destruction, Officer Hamilton helped Oscar file a preliminary report, advising him to take videos, photos, gather statements from neighbors if they witnessed anything, and to get a lawyer, a good one. Oscar stood in his backyard long after everyone had left, the motion-activated security lights casting harsh shadows across the wasteland that had once been his sanctuary. The garden had been more than just plants to him. It had been therapy, a way to ground himself when the memories of war threatened to overwhelm him. Each vegetable he'd grown, each flower he'd planted, had been a small victory over his trauma. His hand trembled slightly as he touched the stump of one of the oak trees. His grandfather had planted these trees when he built the house, telling young Oscar stories about how they would grow together, their roots deep in the same soil that had given their family a home for generations. Now they were gone, destroyed by someone who saw his sanctuary as nothing more than a blemish on their perfect suburban vision. As he walked through the debris, his military training kicked in. Assess the situation, identify the threat, formulate a response. Carol Preston and her homeowners association had clearly underestimated him, assuming he would be an easy target. Perhaps they thought his PTSD would make him retreat, make him an easy victim for their expansion plans. They had made a serious mistake. Oscar Brown hadn't survived 3 tours in Afghanistan by backing down from a fight. As he entered his house and began making calls, first to his bank to freeze any potential homeowners association charges, then to several local lawyers, he felt a familiar sense of purpose settling over him. This wasn't just about his property anymore. It was about standing up to bullies who thought they could steamroll the rights of individuals with impunity. By midnight, he had compiled all his documentation, created digital backups, and started a detailed journal of events. Tomorrow he would begin reaching out to his neighbors, suspecting he wasn't the first target of the Homeowners Association's aggressive expansion tactics. But for now, he sat on what remained of his back steps, looking out over the moonlit destruction, and made a silent promise to his grandfather's memory. He would not only restore this place, but ensure that no one else would face the same violation of their sanctuary. The night grew colder, but Oscar remained vigilant, his mind already formulating strategies for the battle ahead. Carol Preston had threatened him with the Homeowners Association's legal resources, but she had no idea what she had started. Sometimes, the biggest fights begin with the smallest injustices, and Oscar Brown was ready for war. The morning sunlight forced its way through Oscar's window, illuminating the remnants of his destroyed garden in stark contrast to the warmth of a new day. It was still early, too early for the world to have fully awoken, but Oscar had little time for reprieve. The need for action pulsed through him as he sat on his back porch, the cool air a refreshing reminder that he had to keep moving. With the resolve of a soldier preparing for deployment, Oscar opened his laptop on the kitchen table and began to research the Oakwood Heights Homeowners Association. Each keystroke felt like a march toward reclaiming his territory. He scoured the internet, compiling information on community regulations, recent news articles, and legal precedents regarding homeowners associations and property rights. He had spent years maneuvering adversaries in combat. Now, it was time to use that strategy to confront a different kind of enemy. His first call was to the county clerk's office, and he could feel hope flickering as he talked to a woman named Martha. "That's odd," she said after hearing his story, shuffling through digital records. "There's no official filing for Homeowners Association boundary expansion in that area. They would need to submit extensive documentation and get approval from the county commission." As Martha promised to email him copies of recent Homeowners Association filings, Oscar felt a flicker of determination ignite within him. He began creating a timeline of his experience, detailing each interaction regarding his property, the destruction of his garden, and Carol's dismissive attitude. Each moment was a building block, constructing a fortress of evidence to prepare for battle. Before long, a knock at the door interrupted his focused research. Tom Barton, the neighbor from 2 properties over, stepped inside. "Oscar, I saw what they did to your place," he said, his expression grim. "The same thing almost happened to me 3 months ago." Curiosity piqued, Oscar poured Tom a cup of coffee, and they settled at the kitchen table, the atmosphere charged with the shared understanding of their plight. As Tom recounted how the Homeowners Association had attempted to bully him into compliance, Oscar's anger festered but quickly transformed into resolve. "I'll be damned if I let them destroy my sanctuary," he muttered, the fire in his gut igniting. "I threatened legal action and they backed off," Tom explained, glancing nervously out the window. "But I've been documenting everything just in case." Oscar nodded, inspired by Tom's proactive approach. As if triggered by his thoughts, more neighbors began arriving, each with stories echoing the same theme of intimidation and harassment from the Oakwood Heights Homeowners Association. Patricia Hamilton, the elderly widow from 2 houses down, broke down in tears as she described how they had threatened to put a lien on her house for unauthorized landscaping. Oscar felt his heart clench with empathy. These were people who had nurtured their homes and gardens, creating sanctuaries much like he had. He grabbed a notepad and began jotting down names and incidents, knowing the collective power of their testimonies would be vital in his fight against the association. As the morning drifted toward afternoon, Oscar's kitchen transformed into a makeshift war room. More neighbors arrived. Rachel Martinez, a paralegal living in the association, Carl Ramirez, a former board member, and even Terry Foster, a retired city council member. With each new voice, the stakes felt higher. They were forming a tapestry of resistance, weaving together each thread of discontent into a formidable force. "I've been tracking the association's activities quietly for months," Terry said, sifting through his own collection of documents on Oscar's table. "They are running a sophisticated real estate scheme. It's not just about property values, it's about control." Oscar listened intently, realizing the enormity of the injustice they were all fighting against. The Homeowners Association was not merely overreaching, it was wielding power like a sword, ready to cut down anyone who disagreed. "We can't let them get away with this," Oscar declared. "We have to organize. Let's document everything, band together, and make them accountable." As they pooled their resources, Rachel, feeling uneasy, spoke up. "I work for the firm that handles their legal affairs. What they're doing isn't right, and I can help gather internal documents." The room fell silent as they regarded her cautiously, but the flicker of trust began to grow. "I want to see this through," she continued. Their plans crystallized into action. They brainstormed strategies for gathering evidence, documenting every incident of harassment and intimidation. Each neighbor shared their experiences, and Oscar instilled a sense of urgency in the room. "We need to take action, and we need a lawyer, a good one. Someone who understands the dynamics of our situation and is willing to fight back." By the time the afternoon sun began to dip low in the sky, they had established a plan. A neighborhood meeting to discuss their collective experiences, gather more testimonies, and research local legal resources. Oscar's heart swelled at the thought of a united front, a brigade of individuals standing together against the Homeowners Association's bullying tactics. As the sun began to set, turning the sky a brilliant orange, Oscar looked around the room at his neighbors. "We may not have the resources they do, but we have something far more powerful, the truth in each other," he affirmed. A buzz of agreement rippled through the group, and with it, determination set in. When the meeting concluded, Oscar felt a weight lift off his shoulders. They were no longer isolated. They were a force to be reckoned with. Driven by a shared sense of justice, he felt empowered, ready to confront not just the association's unjust actions but the fear that had previously kept them all silent. As dusk settled, Oscar sat on his porch looking out over the destruction once more. He may have lost the battle of his garden today, but tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow marked the beginning of a campaign, not just to restore his sanctuary but to reclaim the unity and strength of their community. He knew the fight wouldn't be easy. The Homeowners Association had resources and connections, but Oscar Brown had never backed down from a fight. He may have been facing a metaphorical enemy, but like a soldier assessing the battlefield, he understood how to leverage the weapons at his disposal. And today, those weapons were the stories and strength of his neighbors. Determined to make a change, he whispered a silent promise to the stars above. They had awoken something that could no longer be silenced, and he was ready to lead them into battle. As the first light of dawn crept into the sky, Oscar felt a renewed sense of purpose surge through him. Each sunrise held the promise of a new beginning, and today was no different. He had gathered his neighbors, united in their struggle, and together they were prepared to reclaim what had been taken from them. The air was crisp as Oscar stepped outside to greet the day. He quickly typed up an email to the local news station, Channel 7, outlining the recent events and inviting them to cover the Homeowners Association's injustices. A story of community unity could resonate with others facing similar issues, he hoped, and spark broader support. But this time, they wouldn't just be passive victims. They would be the architects of their own narrative. After sending the email, Oscar met his neighbors at the designated spot for their meeting. A small park adjacent to his property, once a personal sanctuary with a few benches and trees, now buzzed with the energy of shared determination. They arrived armed with stories, photographs of flourishing gardens threatened, testimony papers, and a collective anger that had turned to resolve. "Let's get started," Oscar said, the momentum picking up as everyone settled on the grass and folding chairs. Each of us has experienced the Homeowners Association's oppression in different ways. Today, we gather our strength and our voices. Together, we're not just going to fight back, we're going to expose the truth. The group took turns sharing their stories, each account more heartbreaking than the last. Patricia Hamilton spoke of the roses her late husband had nurtured, his legacy now threatened by the association's fines. Tom shared a story about how they'd almost evicted an elderly neighbor, citing rules that had never been enforced before. Each tale wove a tapestry of shared suffering and injustice, and Oscar felt the passion in the air thickening. Once the last neighbor had spoken, Oscar rose again. "We all have a stake in this fight, but we need a plan. Rachel, can you start gathering internal documents from the association? We need evidence to support our claims." Rachel nodded, determination flooding her expression. "I can access the files and emails. If they are hiding something, I'll find it." "Tom, I want you to help rally the neighbors who couldn't make it today. We need to show that we truly represent the community. Anyone else who has suffered must know they are not alone." As the group divided responsibilities, whispers of strategy and action surged around them, like the low hum of a mighty machine awakening. Oscar could see the change on their faces, last night's anxiety transforming into steely resolve. Each suggestion outlaid added fuel to the fire igniting in their hearts. As the meeting adjourned, Marcus Reynolds, their potential legal ally, arrived, bringing with him an air of professionalism that gave Oscar a fresh wave of hope. "I've spoken to a few local reporters about your situation. They're interested in covering this story," he said, his voice steady. "What's the next step?" Oscar inquired, feeling the weight of the fight ahead but driven by the newfound kinship. "Gather all the testimonies and documentation, Oscar. There's power in numbers. If we can compile enough evidence, we'll present our case not only in court but to the media, showing the community's resilience against institutional corruption." That night, armed with the energy from their gathering, Oscar sat at his kitchen table again, now strewn with papers, charts, and notes. He envisioned the campaign they were building, a grassroots movement fueled by the determination to stand up against oppressive authority. As he typed the notes, a more vivid vision unfurled in his mind's eye. What the garden could become. A community hub, a sanctuary for veterans, a symbol of resilience and strength against adversity. Oscar couldn't help but smile faintly at the thought that a space originally meant to heal his own wounds had the potential to heal so many others. Days turned into weeks as the effort intensified. Oscar and his neighbors collaborated tirelessly, Rachel working stealthily on collecting incriminating documents while the others gathered testimonies from more frustrated homeowners. They drafted letters to state representatives, informed local advocacy organizations, and even started a social media campaign with the ####HashStandWithOscar. Just when Oscar thought he was ready to present everything to the media, a twist of fate arrived one morning. He received an unexpected call from the city council. "Mr. Brown, we'd like to discuss a report that has come to our attention regarding the Homeowners Association," said a composed voice on the other end. Inviting rather than confronting, they asked him to come in for a meeting. Conflicted, Oscar considered their invitation, The implications of meeting might either strengthen their case or play into the creator's hands. Yet, the undeniable truth remained. The council could either intervene or bolster the association's actions. Oscar thought of everything he had built in solidarity with his neighbors, their fears, their stories that intertwined like the roots of the oak trees they had lost. He needed to approach this opportunity with caution. "Yes, I'll be there," he replied, steel threading through his voice as he prepared for whatever conversation was about to unfold. Arriving at the city council office, Oscar felt his gut tighten. He entered the room filled with representatives and a few city officials, their faces inscrutable. Everyone's eyes turned to him. Taking a deep breath, he steadied himself, remembering the voices of his neighbors who had stood behind him, giving him strength. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Brown. We appreciate your activism, and we're concerned about the recent allegations against the Homeowners Association," said the council member, leaning forward. "We want to gather your perspective on the situation." Oscar shared the stories of harassment, each word a bullet, piercing the air with truth. He laid out the evidence he had gathered, bolstered by testimonies from his neighbors, who had joined him in solidarity. He spoke not only for himself but for everyone who had felt suffocated by the oppressive weight of the Homeowners Association. The council listened intently, their expressions shifting as he revealed the depth of the injustice. When he finished, he leaned back, allowing the weight of their collective struggle to rest in the air. However, as the discussion evolved, the tone changed. A hint of condescension slipped through. "Mr. Brown, we appreciate your passion, but the Homeowners Association serves an essential function. We can't simply dismantle it based on individual grievances," one council member stated. Oscar felt a spark of anger igniting again. But these grievances are not individual. They are part of a larger pattern of abuse. This is about community rights, not just regulations. He pressed, "Don't you see? Together, we can hold them accountable for their actions." In that heated moment, he could feel his breath quickening, but he forced himself to remain grounded. The council members seemed unfazed, shrugging off his insistence as another petty complaint. As they wrapped up the meeting, Oscar's heart sank. It felt as if they were dismissing not just him but the entire community behind him. He left the city council office with a knot of frustration tightening in his chest, unsure of what to expect next. But it wasn't over. He had more ammunition now. Every word of disbelief against him would only add to their collective resistance. The battle was becoming a public one, and with the truth as his weapon, Oscar Brown was ready to escalate the fight. Little did the council know, dealing with Oscar and his community would prove far more complicated than simply silencing their voices. As he left, a wave of resolve washed over him. Despair would not have a place in this community anymore. Oscar's hardening spirit reflected the quiet vow he had made to the roots of those oak trees. He wasn't merely ready to fight, he was prepared to lead a revolution. And if the Homeowners Association misjudged the strength of unity, they were about to discover just how wrong they were. As Oscar stood outside the city council building, the weight of the earlier meeting pressed upon him like a lingering cloud, but within him stirred an undeniable fire. He turned to the parking lot where a small crowd of his neighbors awaited his return, eyes filled with hope and concern. Their faith in him was palpable, and he could feel the energy pulsing in the air between them. "It didn't go as planned," he began, drawing a collective breath from the group. "But they heard us. We've got to keep pushing. We can't let their dismissive attitudes discourage us." Tom stepped forward, his hands clenched in determination. "You spoke for all of us, Oscar. We know what we're fighting against. Let's not give up now. We'll fight harder." That night, they reconvened in Oscar's living room, the atmosphere charged with urgency. They spread out documents, evidence collected over the weeks, amid snippets of dialogue that buzzed in the air like electricity. "We need a way to reach more people," Rachel suggested, scrolling through her phone. "This isn't just our battleground. We need to mobilize the community, and social media can help us amplify our voices." Oscar nodded, glancing at a whiteboard they had propped up in a corner filled with their notes, anecdotes, and sketches of their proposed community garden project. It had evolved into a bigger idea, a community initiative not just against the association but for the neighborhood itself, a beacon of hope against the darkness of injustice. Let's engage the local papers, start a petition, and make flyers, he declared. But more importantly, let's host a rally. Let's show the community what's happening, gather support. We can host it in the park. The room erupted in agreement, and plans took shape. Soon, there were dividing tasks. Rachel and Marcus would design the campaign materials, while Tom and Patricia would reach out to local organizations for support. Within hours, the energy in the house was intoxicating, their anger morphing into a coherent battle strategy. Days passed like swift shadows as the rally date approached. The atmosphere returned to a hum of unity and urgency. The neighborhood was abuzz with conversations sparked by the flyers hung on every telephone pole and community board. Oscar began to feel the weight of leadership but found strength in the camaraderie that had blossomed. On the day of the rally, Oscar stood together with his neighbors in the park, their signs waving in the air, fighting for our home and community matters. The voices of support mingled in a cacophony of purpose as they welcomed attendees, a steady stream of locals who'd heard about their struggle, many sharing their own experiences with the Homeowners Association. As he looked around, a wave of emotion swept over him. This was no longer just a fight for his garden. It was about every individual present, a united stand against intimidation and oppression. Rachel stepped forward to the makeshift podium they'd set up, her voice unwavering. Together, we are stronger. We won't be silenced. Oscar could barely contain the energy surging through him as he gripped the microphone. Thank you all for being here today. He called out. This rally is more than just a protest. It's a declaration that we refuse to live in fear of an unjust authority. We will not allow our homes to be taken, our gardens destroyed, or our voices silenced. Cheers erupted, the sound echoing down the street, drawing more residents toward their cause. People began to share their stories, connecting threads that echoed the fear, frustration, and pain they'd all felt individually but struggled to articulate together before now. Photos were taken, stories were shared, petitions signed, and the energy of the crowd soared. As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, they decided to conclude with a vision for a neighborhood gathering space, one that could serve as a testament to their resilience. The project, an inclusive community garden, could become a sanctuary for generations, embodying the spirit of their defiance and unity. Oscar observed his neighbors, fueled with a sense of shared purpose he had never witnessed before. Our stories matter. What we build together matters, he said, his voice firm. Let's create a space for everyone to heal, connect, and grow. We will hold the association accountable, not only for their actions but for the impact they have on our lives. We will cultivate something beautiful from this fight. With that rallying cry, his words ignited even greater fervor in the crowd. Inspired, they discussed the specifics of their community garden idea, permaculture principles, native planting, and inclusive social activities like workshops and shared dinners. They were ready to gather resources, and together they envisioned a future free from intimidation. As waxen twilight enveloped the park, a sense of hope swirled around them, heavier than the impending night. The rally resonated with camaraderie, and the energy of their collective movement became a seed buried deep within their hearts, ready to sprout. Days passed, and news of the rally spread through town, drawing the attention of local media. A reporter reached out, wanting to cover the story, and Oscar felt the weight of possibility shift. They would not only confront the Oakwood Heights Homeowners Association, but they would gain public support, turn their tales of struggle into a narrative for change. However, not every reaction was one of solidarity. There were whispers of resistance from certain corners, members of the Homeowners Association incensed by the growing scrutiny. Oscar received a call one evening from a local news anchor. "They are planning a counter-rally," she said, urgency lacing her tones. "They see you as a threat. It's important you're prepared." The news sent a ripple of tension through Oscar's community. He gathered his neighbors once more. "We should rise above this. The moment they attack us, we become the villains in their eyes." He held firm, encouraging them to remain peaceful and focused on their vision. "Let's showcase our unity, not anger." If they stand against us, we'll simply stand stronger. The day of the counter-rally, Oscar's heart raced, but he drew strength from the throngs of neighbors around him, all wielding signs that symbolized their commitment to the cause. They'd come prepared, armed not only with hope but also numerous piecemeal documents, adding authenticity to the struggle they had voiced. Oscar thought back to the morning he sat on his porch, contemplating how to fight the system. Now, he stood shoulder to shoulder with others, evolving from reactive to proactive, choosing to ensure their narrative was written by them, not the Homeowners Association. As shouts of rival voices echoed, Oscar took a deep breath and stepped up to the front line of their rally, ready to face the storm of opposition. He could see their faces, those who had aimed to bury his garden with bureaucratic tools, standing strong in their defiance against the community's resurgence. But at that moment, he realized the path ahead was not merely about defending land. It was about reclaiming dignity, respect, and the essence of what it meant to be part of a community. Through the chaos, he locked eyes with Rachel, Tom, Patricia, and countless others who stood resolute beside him. Together, they represented hope, and together, they would ensure that hope remained unstoppable.